Hello, I'm Deb Knight. Welcome to A Current Affair. Housing is an issue that's dominating discussions in political circles and around kitchen tables across the country. One thing everyone can agree on is we have a problem. But is putting skyscrapers in the suburbs the solution?
The housing crisis is all about the disconnect between people's ability to buy homes and how much they actually cost.
Terrible. We don't even know if heritage overlays are going to be protected.
All of us have known for some time that this is a real issue.
Obviously, we want to see action when it comes to providing more houses sooner rather than later.
As growing population puts the squeeze on our roads and government at all levels heads further into debt, constructive ideas are needed.
Build more homes and build more homes.
Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen isn't looking to build herself, but says her government would change zoning rules, allowing developers to stick skyscrapers in suburbs with traditionally low-density housing but strong public transport.
Really big developments in areas with a heritage overlay or the like are going to make a significant difference to the character of neighbourhoods. And I think that people deserve and should have appropriate warning about the potential impact of new developments in this part of the world.
Independent Dr Monique Ryan is the federal member for Kooyong, which takes in some of the suggested developments.
I think we really would need to know if there's a lot of high-rise going in, where it will be and how it will impact local residents. But everyone in Kooyong understands that we need more housing.
Melbourne's eastern suburbs and Brighton by Port Phillip Bay targeted by the Allen government for apartment blocks up to 20 storeys tall.
The housing crisis is a current problem, but some of the ideas being put up to solve it aren't new. Communities have a long history of pushing back against government rezoning ideas that may change the character of their area, including one very famous example here in the Melbourne suburb of Camberwell.
Speaking of characters, Dame Edna was from Moonee Ponds, but Barry Humphries grew up in Camberwell. In 2004, the showbiz legend led a community victory against a proposed tower, with the government at that stage trying to push through a structure just 3 storeys high.
I'm dismayed that these planners still feel they can act without talking to residents.
20 years on, today's residents of Brighton feel the same way.
High-rise is not the answer.
We don't want 20-storey tower.
No to towers!
Liberal MP James Newbury.
This plan is sacrificing community livability because of population growth. We know it'll mean more traffic, more people. We just don't have the resources for it. We don't have the spots in schools for it.
But the industry says market forces won't create the type of cheap housing the government says it will.
They're selling this affordability vision for young people where they can get into apartments in these great areas, but then they don't do the math on how much it's actually going to cost people. And the reality is it's out of most people's price range.
According to Max Schiffman from developer Intrapac Property, apartments need to sell at around $14,000 per square metre for the business case to stack up, meaning under the government's high-density plan, a young family would need $1.5 million for a 3-bedder.
We'd be much smarter collectively if we worked backwards and said people have this capacity to buy on average, what sort of homes can work for them? And at the moment, the only things that will really fit that range for most people is going to be a detached house in a new greenfield area, or possibly an attached terrace or townhouse in a middle ring suburb.
Max also urging policymakers to look outside the city.
The regions need a bigger push. There's a lot of opportunity in regional areas. They need more people to support local businesses, and they have infrastructure that's already there that can be utilised to service more people. So definitely something should be looked at more closely.
Melbourne's existing property market is set to be laid bare in Nine's new Listing Melbourne reality show, featuring one of the block's favourite buyers advocates, Nicole Jacobs.
I love people and I love property. Together, that's real estate.
Kelly Ryan is the CEO of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria and says her organisation is in favour of the high-rise plan.
We notionally support the concept, assuming the right amount of due diligence is done, obviously, between the announcement and then action. One thing to make an announcement, second thing is to make sure you back it up quickly.
But Kelly says the real issue is that stamp duty and land tax is putting mum and dad investors off buying into new apartments, and she wants to see better incentives.
We've put forward to the government that anyone that has held an investment property for at least 5 years should receive a minimum 10% rebate on their land tax, and every year in which they hold it, they get an additional rebate. We're really happy to see that housing is back on the agenda from a government perspective, and hope that the announcements can be followed up by action.
Yeah, it's certainly a big problem, but how do we fix the housing crisis that is up there with the cost of living as a key issue for all Australians? Well, Nicole Jacobs is a buyer's advocate, well known to viewers of The Block and now Listing Melbourne, and she joins me now. Nicole, owning your own home, it's the great Australian dream, but has it become the nightmare that's now just out of reach for so many?
Well, for some people, absolutely, Deb, and it is the great Australian dream. We all love bricks and mortar. We all want to be able to hang up a painting on our wall without asking a landlord, and we really want to be able to have that, you know, maybe the quarter-acre block is now gone, but we would love to have a place where we can call home that is ours. So it is unaffordable for very many Australians out there, and so we need to be able to have some strategies in place so that people can actually afford their own home.
And key to that is, of course, supply, because we need to boost supply. A lot of talk this week about talk of building high-density apartments around transport hubs, railway stations and the like, an idea that some are dead against. What's your view?
Look, there's a pros and cons list here, I think, Deb. If we start with the positives, of course, it's always great to be able to utilise infrastructure that's already in place. People love lifestyles where they've got easy access to transport, cafes, restaurants, schools, supermarkets, etc. So it's a great way of being able to bring people to current infrastructure. But what that does do then, if you've got that high density living, it really does change some of these suburbs that they're looking at putting, you know, high-rise developments in. And so when we have a look at some of the negatives, of course, it can change the way a suburb looks, first of all, so the character of a suburb. Secondly, if we have a look at the demand on that suburb, so if we increase, say, we have 200 apartments all of a sudden in an area that didn't have any of those before, already the schools in the area that may already be overloaded with students, now the kids that are coming and living in those apartments with their parents are in the zone, and so the school may not be able to cope with that. And then we have more traffic on the streets, and we turn an area that was once a very village lifestyle into a more transient landscape, and that can really change the way a suburb feels.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance to ensure that the character of a place isn't destroyed by towers. But the other thing that pops up all the time is stamp duty, and that's a tax that's viewed as the ultimate deterrent for downsizers. Would scrapping stamp duty help the housing market, do you think?
I think stamp duty is something that we need to look really strongly at, because when first home buyers, for instance, or even any buyers going into the market have to factor in a huge cost of stamp duty, it can be a deterrent to coming into the market. If we scrap it altogether, what we tend to find in the market is that we have more people out there looking for property because all of a sudden they're being able to afford to get into the market. But what generally happens is that even though it's a saving to them, if we scrap it, they tend to add that saving, which they didn't have before, but they add it to the price of the property that they're looking for. And it all comes back to supply and demand, Deb. So it can actually lead to an increase in the cost of what those properties are worth.
So what can governments do then? What do they need to do to try to solve this crisis?
Well, it's a great question because, of course, governments often come in with incentives to help first home buyers or to help, you know, with stamp duty, and that mix now, whether it's stamp duty or land tax, because let's not forget, I mean, in Victoria alone, stamp duty generates over 30% of the revenue for the state. So they're going to want to get that revenue back from somewhere. So do we go into land tax or do we continue with stamp duty? So incentives are great, but again, it comes back to supply and demand. And if we're giving incentives out to, say, first home buyers, which is great to get them into the market, it again floods the market with a lot of buyers, and if people aren't selling, we have that supply-demand imbalance.
Yeah, and it could send, as you say, prices even higher. So interest rates are, of course, key to this too, and the next decision comes from the Reserve Bank on Melbourne Cup Day. What's your punt? Are we going to see rates as they are, or can we expect them to start coming down this year? Is it going to be next, though?
I think it would be wonderful to think that they're going to come down before the end of the year, but I don't think the RBA is going to announce that, unfortunately. I personally don't think that we'll have an interest rate cut until well into next year. And of course, that really does halt some markets because it also means that lack of confidence comes from that if we don't have an interest rate cut. And that means that, again, we have, you know, people hesitating to get into the market and hesitating to put their own property on the market. So I just can't see an interest rate cut this time around.
Yeah, well, it's a big problem we need to solve, that is for sure. Nicole, thank you so much.
Thanks, Deb.